Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Ed Wallace. I'm a vice chairman of the French American Foundation. We are very proud to have Borough President Gale Brewer with us today. I'm going to introduce the moderator, Simon Tafoya. First, let me just thank the French American staff, starting, of course, with Emmeline Foster. Let me acknowledge Alan Chapin, our chair, who couldn't be here today. And also just let everybody know that we are supported by very strong staff. I'm not going to introduce Gale Brewer because Simon's going to do that, but I must say that I have known her since 1977. I remember the date and the time and the place. She has been an extraordinary public servant and really somebody devoted to the public good. Let me tell you about Simon. Simon is one of our former young leaders from the year of 2018. He is a managing director at PayIt, which is a payment platform
because I have to go quick.
for public services. He served as a senior director for policy and federal relations for Governor John Hickenlooper in Colorado. He started that in 2012, and he led efforts on economic development, technology, telecommunications, cybersecurity, etc. But he's also worked on the Hill as a staffer for Senator Harry Reid and later for Senator Mark Udall. So he knows his stuff when it comes to the government and the political world. He is a graduate of Colorado College and received his master's from Princeton University. So with that all said, Simon, I turn it over to you, and eager to listen to your conversation with our borough president, Gale Brewer.
Thank you, Ed. Appreciate it. And thanks to the French American Foundation for asking me to moderate this conversation with Manhattan Borough President Gale Brewer. She is, as you said, Ed, an extremely dedicated public servant, somebody who has taken her role as a citizen of Manhattan extremely seriously, somebody who's worked on humanitarian issues within the city and elsewhere, worked vehemently supporting equality in New York City, and of course, as a staunch advocate for not just the borough of Manhattan, but the entire city. So again, an extreme example of a public servant, having served previously as a city council member and in education, both in institutions in New York, but also at JFK, John F. Kennedy School at Harvard. So again, she has an extreme amount of experience, and we are excited to listen to the president's comments about how New York City and how Manhattan in particular has responded to the issues around COVID and the challenges that the city has faced, along with how they've been able to react to utilizing leadership and technology. So hopefully Gale, are you with us now? I know she had to turn off her video. There she is. I just want to turn it over to you. Thank you so much for being here and joining us. We're excited. I know you speak French as well, so all you Francophones individuals out there, we have an individual who loves French, which should be between you friends. So I'll turn it over to you to provide some comments, and then we'll go to Q&A.
Well, thank you very much, Simon and Ed Wallace and Institute. This is very special for me. So I spent quite a bit of time in France as a child because my grandfather lived in Gale, which is right outside of Rouen. So I'm sorry, I'm out of breath because I ran. I want to say a couple of things. I know one of your questions is what's going on in the city, what's going on in Manhattan, because I actually did a French television show video recently, and they read in the paper about all the challenges that the city is having, in terms of crime and homelessness. And I just came from, East Harlem, where there is a great food distribution. The volunteerism and the support for the communities doesn't come across in the media. I think Ed Wallace and those living here know how much people are putting into their communities. So I think that's important. And I want to say groups that have never worked together are doing that. Second, we do, however, have in Manhattan in particular, we have economic challenges, education challenges, health challenges, but one that's particular to Manhattan is the issue of people not going back to work in Midtown. And so what happens, of course, is when you don't have the workers, you don't have the 65 million tourists, then the shops and the businesses that are on the ground are really challenged. So I just got off with Zoom this morning with we call them the business improvement district, but it's really the chambers of commerce in our city. And in Manhattan in particular, because they have the restaurants and the outdoor restaurants copying France and Europe with these wonderful outdoor opportunities where people design interesting dining places, and they're all fabulous. They've made a big difference for streetscape and I hope for the restaurants. But if you don't have customers, it makes it hard. So the biggest issue for the restaurants and the retail in Midtown is between the mayor and the governor and the banks and the financials and the law firms. People really need to go back to work. And some of it is, can I get on the subway? Am I safe? People are saying, take an alternate transportation, a bicycle, a Revel, walk, take a bus, but get to the place of business. And again, the mayor has to say the same thing to city workers. That would help. But I just say, in terms of Manhattan, that is a big challenge. You also have the challenge, of course, is what happens? Do we have enough percentage for the indoor dining? Can the outdoor dining continue after October 31? So those are issues that are, concern to the business community. I will say that we're also, challenged just in terms of the census. I know that's not top of everyone's mind who is not from the US, but I will say it's every 10 years. The problem for Manhattan, which is different than other places in the United States, is that many left to go to a temporary location during the pandemic. We actually called the Board of Elections, Ed will appreciate this, and we found that there are 35,000 during June people from Manhattan only who requested an absentee ballot. Maybe they're on Long Island, maybe they're in Connecticut, maybe they're upstate in New York. So we wrote to them and said, with the League of Women Voters, please fill out your ballot with your New York City address. Actually, you're supposed to do that with your permanent address, but not having them fill it out as they did 10 years ago. And they did it in the 78th percentile self-response rate, has brought their areas down to the 50% response rate and is bringing down the whole city. So the census is an issue, not just for New York, it's for the whole country. But Manhattan is being hurt by those who are not filling it out because they're not here, and we need them to fill it out with their New York City address. We also have had many challenges in terms of the disparities which come up in Manhattan and the 5 boroughs and across the country. We are trying to figure out between the health disparities, during the pandemic. I'm sure this is true in Europe also, but the essential workers went to work, healthcare, grocery, and they're mainly from the communities of color. And many of them died, not disproportionately. Obviously, we have a huge rate generally about people who died in the United States, but people who could stay home were able to be healthier. So all of that is created, I think, you hear about the police community and we know about the protests, but there's so many differences in our communities now. I hear it. I hear people from the suburbs stating, I'm not going back to work because I'm afraid of the crime and the homeless. And then I hear from the young people and people who are part of the protests and who are have been disproportionately hurt by the COVID and communities of color in general, the challenges of those who are wealthier perhaps and who are not comfortable because of the crime and the homeless. The homeless is a big issue. The mayor, to his credit, moved individuals out of congregate, which are shelters. I don't know how it works in Europe, but here in the United States, at least in New York, we have, and Ed knows this better than anybody, we have a right to shelter law. So if you want to be in a shelter, you can ask for that. If you want to be on the street and you don't want to move, that is a fact. You can be coaxed, you can gain trust with a social worker, but you don't actually have to move. So what happened in the pandemic is, to the credit of the mayor, people were moved, 13,000, from the shelters to hotels. Hotels are empty. Hotels needed the money. So the city paid for the hotels along with the federal government. So now you have, in Midtown, it's probably, I don't know, maybe 20 hotels that are populated with homeless. We've had some on the Upper West Side, which got a lot of press. These are individuals, many of whom are working, many of whom have just challenges out of jail, doing well, trying to get back on their feet. I've met many of them. And then, of course, there are individuals who are in camping and individuals who have drug problems. It is all mixed up. And places where hotels didn't exist with the homeless now exist. And they're not in their home territory, which is a shelter perhaps on the Lower East Side, as I know, or shelters in other parts of the city. So they're not used to the community. They're not used to, never been to Central Park. They don't know how the city operates, and they've gotten a lot of anger from local residents. All of that adds to the challenges that I think I'm trying to describe to you in our city. While the volunteerism is going on and there are just tons of people giving out food, giving out PPE, giving out funding. Goddard Riverside Neighborhood Center, which is an organization on the Upper West Side, has now raised $500,000 to both employ and support 6 days a week at their facility some of these individuals. So there's a lot of good out there, but it's divisive. Of course, I could blame the federal government for some of that, but again, we have to figure out what to do. So I think in terms of your first question about leadership, you know, you have the other issue that leadership comes up on is a school. I mean, if you're a parent right now, and I know you have parents that are on this call, it's a little confusing. Obviously, the smaller children and the children with disabilities opened their schools yesterday. I was there for some of them. Others are going to open on the 29th and then more on October 1st. And a lot of kids want to go back to school. The kids I talk to are just dying to go back to school. But then the question is, the teachers, are there enough? Because a lot of teachers have underlying conditions. Is the building ready? And so, you know, you get into, didn't we decide this, or shouldn't we have decided this earlier? That's where I think leadership is lacking, because people have to plan. The same thing with the small businesses on the call this morning. Is the outdoor dining going to end on October 31, or is it going to continue? How much staff do I need? How much food do I need to order? Do I need heaters? Do I have propane heaters? Do I have electrical heaters? Do I need to call the electrician to come help me figure out how to put in an electric? Does the fire department allow me to have a propane? And if I'm going to go indoor dining, how does this mix as the time goes on? So you can see that there's just so many. You got to make a decision so that these individuals and these businesses and these schools can plan. That's where I think leadership is lacking. And I want to just say that the other question you had, I think, was all about what to do in terms of technology. And technology is I would chair the technology committee in the city council. I have spent a lot of time on open data portal in the city of New York is based on a law that I passed when I was in the city council in the 2000s, early 2000s. And what that says is that every single city agency, and there's about 80 of them, has to put their data on this open portal, this open data portal. And it has helped in terms of both the agencies and the public to know what is this agency actually counting and how it can be used. We actually have a nonprofit housed in our office called Beta NYC, and they literally work with the community boards, which are the local city hall, so to speak, in every neighborhood, 12 in Manhattan, 59 in the city. And they take this data and they analyze it and help the community boards work in the community to be able to use it. Because it's one thing to be an academic or somebody in the real estate industry that can find somebody to do the analysis, but it's harder on the community people so that they can plan. So the whole issue of open data can help us, I think, in many ways, even to know where the vacant storefronts are. I passed a bill that said by the end of February of 2021, we have to know where the storefronts are that are vacant. Owners have to tell us. And there are many other issues. That's number one in terms of technology, just the whole how you use open data. And the second issue is, and I saw there was an op-ed in the Daily News today about this, is just what can we do about broadband that can make it accessible? Because now we've learned from COVID, students, telemedicine, looking for a job is all based on the net. And those of us in offices, we know how to use it. We have somebody who can help us. But you cannot imagine how many individuals in homeless shelters, NYCHA, not with a lot of income, thick walls, and there's no broadband, there's no bandwidth. It's not fast enough. And here we are in 2020 with students needing it more than ever. So I could go on and on about the need for, whether it is from the companies or from the city, we have to figure out a way of having free, accessible, fast broadband, just like any other utility. It's been a long discussion. I've had the same discussion for 20 years, but we still need to have it. You know, if you're in healthcare and you're trying to work with a senior and you're trying to do telemedicine with the visiting nurse service, I can tell you it doesn't always work. And that's just only the beginning in terms of the challenges. And obviously, you know, right now with testing and with tracing and with the need for the labs, I know we just luckily got a New York City lab to be working at the Alexandria, which is right near Bellevue Hospital. All of this needs a better technology infrastructure. So I don't know, Simon, if that helps to give you a sense, but I'm honored to be here. I love your country and your language. You should know that in New York City, we obviously have Lycée Français, which is a private school, but we also have PS 84, which has a dual language, French, English, and we have a middle school, Lafayette High School, that is also French, English. So we're very focused on dual language, and I believe those are the two schools in Manhattan. I know there are other boroughs, I'm aware of that, but these are the only two I know in the borough of Manhattan that are public. Yeah. Thank you so much.
Yeah, well, I want to dig a little bit deeper on a comment you made earlier as it relates to leadership and looking at specifically, you know, we know there are different layers of leadership within government, whether it's the local level, you know, the borough, the city, the state, and the federal government as examples. How has the communication across those layers helped or potentially hurt the response in Manhattan? And, you know, how has that impacted resource allocation and resiliency in Manhattan and in the city?
Okay, so the leadership at the beginning of COVID was obviously challenged, particularly by just PPE. I mean, we were caught unaware, I think, and between the hospitals, the nursing homes, etc. As time went on, with both the state and the city, they don't always work together. I don't know if that's true in other states. You know Colorado better than I do. But here in New York, they don't always work together. So the just production of PPE between the shields and the gowns and the masks and the gloves, we finally got the garment center and the Brooklyn Navy Yard and so on starting to make them. But they were both scrambling between China and, you know, around the world, competing with even the federal government. So, you know, that was hopefully never to happen again. I hope we don't have a second, but, you know, even the state and the city were competing a little bit on that. So the second issue is the schools. It's the governor who actually says open or not, statewide. Every county can decide what they want, right? But there's a lot of competition between the two of them. I sit on the governor's recovery task force, all 5 borough presidents, labor, business, and there's always, you know, a little bit of challenge between the two of them. So you have to, as a local elected official, kind of navigate it, to be honest with you. I think they both have the best intentions, but it makes it hard, as I indicated, for the small businesses right now. COVID is down to below 1%, as you know. My understanding is only one person, although one person is too many, died yesterday from COVID. That's very different than 800 to 1,000 who were dying at the height. I know 12 or 13 people personally who died. I think we all do. So one person is still terrible, but it's better than 800. Yeah. So now the businesses are stating, okay, so who's going to make the decision about enforcement? Because you've got state enforcement from the liquor authority, you got city enforcement from DOT and DOB and other agencies. So example, we should all be working together. Who's going to make the decisions even about propane, electrical? Con Edison is actually a utility, but they are governed by the state Public Service Commission, just to give an example. You get the picture.
Yeah.
In order to get these businesses, even the nursing homes, for a while, it wasn't clear. Is that state or is that city? I mean, they're governed by the state, but when they had no PPE, I gave a little bit. I didn't have a lot, but the mayor gave PPE. You can see I think compared to other states, the state of New York, and Ed Wallace knows this better than I, has a lot of say, even on the housing front. You know, how is leadership on housing? Housing is, we're 70% renters in the city of New York. That's 100% governed by the state. What's the challenge?
I know there's a few people who had more specific questions, but is there a good resource today that is a clearinghouse, so to speak, that individuals to get those? No.
The answer to that question is unequivocally no. It's not to say that we're not used to doing it. So we know for the state, we go for housing. Property tax is local, but every other tax is state. So those of us in the know where the decisions are made, but we also know that it doesn't make sense for the persons on the ground because we should be more coordinated.
Just on that note, I mean, obviously there's so many things that you mentioned in terms of the challenges that are faced as, from a leadership vacuum, if you will. And, how do you then look at utilizing or leveraging technology and leveraging partners in the public the private sector to be able to help resolve some of those issues and communicating directly with your constituency, and then and sort of these coordination challenges that are faced, in such a crisis like this?
Well, I mean, there are great partnerships. There is something called The Partnership, which is headed up by Kathy Wild. It's all the big corporations. And they did write 160 of them a letter to the mayor recently, asking for some of the things I just stated, go back to work, our shops need your support and so on. So there are tons of great partnerships in the 5 boroughs and particularly Manhattan in terms of, and so I think that people do work together in many cases in terms of the partnership. We all have been doing it on voter registration and census in particular. Everybody's been working together. But I think the division starts, I mean, technology can help somewhat in terms of obviously data. It would be great if more information was online, but at the same time, you have to have more bandwidth accessible to people. So, there's a little bit of we do have a big divide in the city, and maybe this is true across the country, in terms of people who, feel that the police should be defunded, right? And people who feel that the police need to be funded and do their job and not have those that are not good police officers be on the force. But all of this is challenging as you are also dealing with, huge unemployment, job loss, and other issues that are not that are specific to this COVID. Mm-hmm. So I guess what I'm trying to say, technology can help if it is for everybody, but you have to make sure it is for everybody. And right now I think it's not for everybody. The
Right.
libraries aren't open. That's another place where people go. As you know, they are doing grab and go a book, which is great, but you can't go in a library building. You can't go in a bathroom. There's no bathrooms available right now, except for some parks, because of COVID. So all of these add up to COVID challenges. Hopefully they will go away, but I think there's a lingering division that isn't going to go away until we can address it.
Just for those who are listening or watching, if you want to enter any questions into the Q&A, we'll try to get to most of those. But I wanted to talk a little bit about, in terms of, you mentioned some of the things that have changed so much, and then we know that, the city, the council, the mayor doesn't necessarily have control of everything. It shares that responsibility with the state and perhaps even the federal government. But as we look at a fundamentally different system and how the city operates, and what the possibility is to leverage infrastructure and utilize it in a different way. So I know there's these people better than I do, but those individuals who are looking at, hey, let's reimagine our streets. Let's talk about doing more bicycling, having more protected lanes, having more of a network of bicycling. So this is perhaps an opportunity to look at how the streets of New York would look in the future. Somebody asked a question about congestion pricing. So, how do we reimagine the use of infrastructure in a time where we just see something drastically different that changes the way we live?
I mean, the good news, there's lots of good news. I talked about the volunteerism. I talk about the communities working together. And I would say the reimagining of the streets is a huge plus. It is so exciting to see the outdoor dining, both on the sidewalk, with leaving space for people to walk, and in the parking spaces. It's phenomenal. And the city has thought about, of course, more bike lanes, starting with Bloomberg and continuing under de Blasio. This is the challenge. So I do believe, I happen to be a big supporter of, I've supported the bus on 14th Street being a busway. Similar, we're looking at 181st Street, and there'll be other streets coming down the line. The issue is there are many agencies who need to sign off so that what is being asked for, because you have bike lanes, you have, as you suggested, bus lanes, street dining. What I would love to see is the arts. I mean, I was at sat in Harlem the other night at dinner in a parking lane, for lack of a better word, at a restaurant. And we had fireworks. I know they weren't legal, but they were very nice. We had, wireless cars, small cars racing. So the arts are really important. They get left out in terms of reimagining our streets. So all of that, even some of the vacant storefronts, which of course exist now, why can't they be places where the arts can be done? So what you need, to answer your question, is like a czar. The look, and that's been, the Municipal Art Society has just called for this. I would call it a streetscape czar, but a public realm czar is what the term is. Absolutely correct, because it is so many agencies. You can imagine, you need Con Ed, you need the Department of Buildings, you need DOT, you need sometimes the health department. It's a very long list. And of course, the State Liquor Authority, the Consumer Affairs. Believe it or not, as you can imagine, the small stores that sell clothing, they say, I don't understand. You can have streets outside for restaurants. Why can't I put my clothes outside so that people can see it? The folks from Soho, where they're praying for more tourists, they have, streets that are closed for restaurants. But what about the clothing? They want to be outdoors. They can't even put a table out. To put a table out is $3,200 to the city right now. If you put a table outside you have to get a permit, and then you have to pay a fee. A lot of that was waived for the restaurants, but you get the picture.
Yeah.
And of course, you got the fire department. Don't forget about them. And there's a longer list. So you need a public realm czar. We just wrote a letter for that, but so did Municipal Art Society, because there's good news, is people want to be outdoors.
Yeah.
And they want to have a healthier existence because I'm outdoors all the time. I feel like I'm safer with my mask. So we do need to have somebody to coordinate all of this.
And, you know, in the spirit of coordination, it's sort of what I think the thesis of that is, you know, how are the boroughs coordinating around these efforts? And how does that then lead into, you know, the agencies, and, you know, what is driving that coordination, and how is it being communicated up?
Okay. Well, the 5 borough presidents, we talk all the time. We're very close friends. We sign letters together. We have lunch when we could, not so often now. We don't have a lot of power, to be honest with you. Every borough was very different. The borough presidents, Ed Wallace knows this only too well, during the 1989 charter change, lost a lot of their power to the city council and the mayor. This is unlike Los Angeles, for instance, which is a very heavy city council. I have friends on the city council in LA. They're very powerful. That is not true in the city of New York. The mayor is all powerful. The city council does land use and budgeting, and the borough presidents we do some land use. We have a role in that. We have a role in the budget, and in terms of allocating capital, and we have a role in appointing community board members and others. And we can pass legislation. But it's mostly, this is a heavy, to be very honest, mayoral city, mayoral control. So then the question is, what do you do for your borough? And the boroughs are very different. And so I think we are good in this particular case of the 5 BPs now. We're very active in doing that. But to say that we can change the course of a particular effort, it takes pressure more than anything else. And like you said, partnerships. So that's what we do. We do a lot of partnerships with our chambers of commerce, with our social service agencies, which, by the way, got a terrible cut, human services. So we just wrote a letter saying how outrageous it is that they're not getting paid fully for last year, not to mention this year. I don't know how it is. You call them NGOs, I think, in Europe, but here they're community-based organizations. They are the lifeblood of our city. I mean, from the seniors to the youth, to the recreation, to the parks, they do the yo person in terms of keeping families intact, particularly now. So we do, I would say that the mayor is in control in terms of making decisions. And the borough presidents can advocate and can participate in land use and bully pulpit, but it's sort of what you make out of your role.
Sure. Can you, to the extent possible, can you comment on what role you see that the current mayor has been playing in coordinating with other bodies, whether it's the governor or the federal government, and perhaps is what you guys are advocating for in your coordination at the borough level really reaching that level?
He and I served together in the city council, so I know him well. Yeah. I think for whatever reason, I'm one of these people who makes a decision. I just, you look at the data, you talk to people, and you make a decision. He, for whatever reason, takes a long time to make a decision. And that's hard because there are many decisions to be made. I understand that. But so that makes it hard, to be honest with you, because then whether it's the homelessness situation, whether it's a small business I described, the schools, etc. So I would say that as a management style is a challenge. He has some wonderful commissioners who are there to be, and what we end up doing, I think, as New Yorkers who are in elected office, we end up talking a lot to the commissioners because they are in many cases excellent, and we just work with them. Because if he can't make a decision, then you go to somebody who can. He does have a record on the pre-K, which was on the front page of the Times today in terms of positive, putting both a 3-year-old and a 4-year-old into school in the city of New York in a year or two was phenomenal. And we all know that individual will be better educated when you have early childhood education. Every resource and scientific study shows that. So that's a good thing. It's just challenging because now with COVID, you have to make more decisions than ever, I think. So, you know, in terms of the borough level, we do our own, you know, work in terms of, I mean, if you add up all the support, you know, the governor and the mayor do end up supporting us as borough presidents in many ways. And so you take that support, whether it's funding, allocations of something like PPE, or just giving you authority on something, then you go with that. You have to make lemonade out of lemons in the borough president's office.
Well, probably you have your fill of lemonade during these times. Yeah. There's a lot of questions around transportation,
Yes.
in particular, you know, buses being free while trains are not. Why aren't we using waterways more? What is transportation and the idea of transportation? We touched on this a little bit in terms of how we use infrastructure on the road, but what are you looking at, or how would you like to comment on the use
Sure.
of alternatives?
Well, transportation is the way that people are going to get to work if they go back to work, and that's the MTA and buses. Buses now cost, as of a few weeks ago. I jumped on buses all the time when they were free, but they're now back to their, you have to use your MetroCard, or soon you'll be able to use your credit card with the Omni system. But I would say that the subway system is perhaps the weakest link right now because of funding. That's really scary, because that's our lifeline. Yes, we should use more waterways. The mayor, to his credit, has put ferry system in, and he gets a lot of complaints from some people, because they say, well, that only brings middle class people to the city, and we should put that money into the subway. I support the ferries. Anything that people can do to get out of their car is a good idea, I think. So, but the subway system, you know, the business community, labor, everybody's asking the feds for money, and the subway system is in deep trouble. It usually, I believe my numbers are correct, around 6 million a day is what it was pre-COVID, and it's now 1.5 or something like that. That's terrible. And now what's happening is, if you take the subway, and I know many of you do, the car comes less frequently, and therefore it's more crowded. So therefore, if you're a business person who's working remotely in Westchester, and I heard this on a phone today, actually, why should I come back, Gale? Because my workers are going to be crowded on the subway and they won't want to use it. So you got the number one issue for New York, perhaps, is money for the subway, so that it can be you know, carrying the right number of people paying their fare, and people can get to work. The other issue, of course, is closed now from 1 to 5 a.m. for cleaning. And the subways are, if you haven't been on, they're brand clean. But if you're at work and you have to leave to go home, and you get off work at 1 o'clock, that's a real problem. And the restaurants, when in-place dining takes place in November, the restaurants are supposed to close. This is a big problem, at 12 for in-place dining. Then you can clear out your customers by 12:30. Your staff may not leave till 1, right? How are they going to get home? And this is many more individuals than exist now in the workplace, and many more customers. So all of these issues are complicated. We want congestion. I do want congestion pricing. It is unbelievably politically charged. It would say that cars that go south of 60th Street get charged. We don't know how much. The state passed it. I supported it when I was in the city council. The money would go to the MTA, supposedly in a lockbox. It is stuck in Washington at the U.S. Department of Transportation, who's headed up by Mitch McConnell's wife. So, you know, that's terrible. I think everybody thought that would be a pro forma sign off. Congestion pricing would help a lot. The people who are in the chambers of commerce and the bids, they want it because they feel it would help, you know, less cars. Less cars actually mean better business. I know a lot of people think, I'll drive to New York, I'll pick up a cup of coffee, I'll stop off at a department store. It doesn't really work like that. You can't park, etc.
Yeah.
So the more people in the subway that works on, pedestrians, that's what actually brings business. And of course, workers and tourists, they don't drive. They usually come in some other public transportation wise. So congestion pricing would help. So would money from the federal government for the subways, because it literally is our life.
Yeah. I think Paris has seen a similar controversy around issues of similar to congestion pricing and alternate uses of infrastructure that have traditionally been used for cars. Do you see any parallels that, between the Parisian model and something that could be, shared knowledge perhaps in that scenario?
I think you know better than I, but I thought we could both learn from London. They seem to have, I have my little cousin lives there with her husband and her kid. And she says, "What? That's not even an issue, Gale. Nobody even talks about it. They just pay or they don't drive in." My understanding is the money has come in, that there's still some congestion. So that means people are still driving in. So, and of course, they did take in London our very favorite transportation expert. We loved him. There was a gentleman who was here for the MTA, and he and the governor didn't get along. So now London is in charge, has him, and he's in charge of the buses, the streets, the subway, I guess they call it the underground or something, and congestion pricing. So there's one person, whereas here, let's see, the governor's in charge of the MTA, to give you an example, and the buses themselves, but not the routes, not, to the streets. So you got DOT and the MTA trying to figure out about buses, just to give you one example of a little bit of overlap and confusion.
Thank you. I want to ask one last question. I know you're a busy person. But
I'm fine. Go ahead.
I think this is a common question, but during this time, it's probably a challenging question to ask because there's probably so many things. But what keeps you up at night? And in terms of all the things that we're dealing with today, and you're dealing with in Manhattan, what you see throughout the city, and the larger context of the world we're living in today, what keeps you up at night? And how do you see us? How do you see us moving forward and progressing through the rest of this challenge?
I mean, when you are elected official in Manhattan or maybe in the 5 boroughs, the biggest challenge pre-COVID and goodness knows now is making sure that people have a home. We have such high cost for living. So it's the apartment dweller. You have in the 5 boroughs, pre-COVID, there were 14,500 eviction notices. This doesn't mean they're going to get evicted, but they're already in the courts, wandering their way through. And then, to the credit of the governor, this is now the governor, the date for an eviction to take place keeps getting pushed. I think it's now sometime in October, November. But you still have to come up with the money. It's not like the money disappeared in terms of what you owe. And you have small landlords. They need money too. So what keeps me up at night is, figuring out this affordable housing problem. So you have the preservation, keeping people in their homes. We do build some new affordable housing, but it's not a lot, to be honest with you. And all you do is wander around and see the 60,000 homeless. Not hard to find them. So that was pre-COVID, current COVID, and I hope it's not forever. But the big issue is, which is now really concerning, is the workers not back at work. This is a COVID issue. They were back in tons before. You couldn't even walk the streets. There were so many people, 60+ million tourists and workers. So now this is an extra layer of what about the businesses that are going to fold if this is a Manhattan issue. Because in Queens, parts of Queens or parts of Brooklyn and the Bronx, there's just tons of residents. They don't have that commercial commercial sector. And Wall Street, et cetera. It's the lack of businesses going back to work, and it has to be train subway safe, and it has to be building safe, you know, and that has to work.
Yeah. Well, thank you. We definitely appreciate you taking the time. Thank you for your leadership. Thank you for your service. You know, on behalf of the French American Foundation and all former fellows and then all the attendees, thank you very much. I want to remind everybody on the call to keep following the French American Foundation for upcoming events. Several of these great events with great speakers and guests like President Brewer in the future. And I'll leave it to President Brewer to see if you have any last words.
Well, I appreciate it. I was an American Swiss Foundation fellow many years ago. So I am, and I'm very familiar with Switzerland and have been there many, many times as a kid and growing up. And that's where I learned French, actually. And I also have great respect for the work that the French government, the Consul General previously and currently, I've actually just spent time with both, a lot of time with the previous one, and currently I just met him at the 9/11 ceremony and we've been in touch. So I really appreciate the work that your foundation is doing. And I do think that these foundations are incredibly important because you never know the ties between the two countries. I know you do a lot of business in New York, and we appreciate that in many ways. And you certainly have long, long, long ties with New York historically, from the Statue of Liberty to many others. And so I'm appreciative of this phone call. I think all major cities are facing some of the same challenges. We have here in New York, we're very biased. We love our city very, very much, but it's hurting. And so we all have to band together to see if, you know, the volunteerism and the goodness that has come out and the excitement of the streetscapes can then translate to some of the other, whether it's leadership or subway or, you know, just the hospitals and the you know, how we can make this even better city in the future. And that's a challenge we're up to, but we all have to work together. And thank you so much, Simon. You have great questions.
Oh, well, thank you. Appreciate your time. And thanks everybody for joining. And again, please keep following the French American Foundation for those upcoming events. Thanks everybody. Thanks, President.
Thank you.